Hey everyone, it's Dave from Dave's Ohio Barbecue. Today, I am going to show you how to make maple syrup from start to finish in your backyard. Stick around. So before I get started today, make sure you hit the subscription button down below and hit the bell next to it too. That way you get a notification anytime I make a new video. So a couple of years ago, I had a series of 3 videos come out. One was about tapping maple trees, one was about processing the maple sap into syrup, and then the other one was about canning it up and jarring it. And if you want to see any of those, which will have far more in-depth information than this video, I'll put a link to it down the bottom. What this video is designed for is just to give you kind of a brief overview to see if making maple syrup in your backyard is A, something you'll be able to do, and B, something you'll want to do. So the first thing we need to do is we need to identify maple trees in your yard. It does not need to be any specific type of maple tree. Now, when you hear about people making maple syrup up in Vermont or up in Canada, Quebec, places like that, they're mostly tapping sugar maples. Sugar maples tend to have a little bit higher sugar content and therefore makes it a little bit easier and cost-effective to make syrup out of it. But you can tap any type of maple tree that you have, well, almost any. Sugar maples are great, silver maples, red maples, they're all fantastic. I'd stay away probably from Japanese maple trees, not because there's anything wrong with them, they just tend to be kind of small and you really don't want to damage the tree. You need a big, fully grown, mature tree in order for this to work. Before you start thinking about tapping, you're going to have to go online and get some spiles. Spiles come in basically 2 varieties. There's the metal ones that are the old-fashioned type that you hang a bucket from, and then what most people use nowadays are these plastic ones that sometimes even come with the piece of blue plastic tubing already stuck to it. I prefer these. When you put these into the tree, make sure you have the right size drill bit for the type of spiles you purchased. And you're going to drill a hole kind of at a slight upward angle. That just tends to help. Nothing severe, just a little bit of an upward angle in the tree. Now, how many taps can you put in each tree? If it's a tree that's about 18 to 24 inches in diameter, that's the width across the tree, you can probably get 1 safely in there. If it's bigger than that, over 24, 25 inches, you could put 2 in there. Just kind of don't put them too close to each other. And then 30, if you have something that's really big, like a huge tree, like over 30 inches, you might be able to get away with 3 taps in it, but I tend not to go over 2 on my trees just because I really don't want to stress the tree out too much and damage it. Is there a certain place you should put these taps? Some people prefer to put these on the south side of the tree. It's the side of the tree that warms up quicker because the sun's in the south this time of year, so they feel like there's more sap flow. I tend to move all the way around the tree. Some guys also like to put the tap underneath a large branch or above a big root, figuring there'll be more fluid traveling up those 2 directions right there. That helps as well. But if you're going to be doing this over multiple years, you're going to be finding that every year you have to move your tap away from where it was. You don't reuse the same hole. So if I tap in one location, I tend to move 6 inches over and 6 inches up or down away from that hole the next year, just because I don't really want to stress the tree out or damage it too much. So wherever is most convenient for you to tap on the tree, that should work fine. Now, the great thing about these plastic spiles that have the tubing coming from it, I like to get plastic buckets that have a sealable lid, and I drill a hole in top of the lid that's just big enough to fit the tubing in there. It keeps bugs out of the sap. It keeps any wandering deer from having a drink, anything like that. It's a good way just to kind of protect everything. And if I have 2 taps on a tree, I might drill 2 holes and put the hoses into the same bucket and just collect it that way. So when should you tap your trees? You usually want to tap your trees in kind of like late winter, end of February, beginning of March, that time. But that doesn't mean it always happens that way. Sometimes you're going to tap earlier. What you're looking for is weather patterns. You want to have days that are above freezing, like in the low 40s, and nights that go back down below 32. The reason is, and here's a little diagram to explain it for you, when it gets warm during the day, the branches and all the ends heat up and they kind of suck moisture out of the ground. That turns into sap and travels up the tree. Now, as it travels up the tree, it comes out the taps and down the hoses. At night, when it gets cold again, that liquid travels back down into the ground or into the roots, and that passes by your tap again. So that direction, that movement of the sap up and down in the trees, that's what gets it to flow. How long can you tap for? Well, Most people think the rule of thumb is you shouldn't leave a tap in a tree for longer than 6 weeks. So if you go and tap in December, by the time the February or March run hits, your tap holes will be dried out and they won't work. So I tend to, at the earliest, tap middle of February. Sometimes I wait until late February, but it is up to you when you want to do it. When does the sap stop running? When the days get warm enough, long enough, and the tree starts getting little buds on it. Not the little tiny buds that are on the end of the branch, but when it starts like budding out leaves, then you know that the season's over, because the sap at that point will taste really disgusting and kind of be of no use to you. So once that happens, and you'll start seeing leaves and stuff budding out on other trees, you're done. It's time to pull the taps and pack it up for the year. How much sap can you expect from a tree? Well, it all depends on weather, but it's not uncommon to get, anywhere between 5 and 10 gallons per tap per year. I've even had some trees produce up to 15 gallons just from one tap for an entire year, but that has to be a really, really favorable weather pattern. One thing you need to know about this sap, now that you've got it collected, it's kind of like milk. It goes bad. You can't just leave it sitting out on your back deck. In a day or two, it'll start turning, and I've actually left a bucket of it out once way too long. It almost turned into like gel, like slime, and you'll smell it. It'll smell bad. So you kind of want to evaporate it as you go, or if you have a way to keep it cool, like a spare freezer or something in the garage, you can like kind of freeze it. Once it has a big plug of ice in it, you can just kind of take it out and let it sit. Just keep an eye on it and make sure there's always ice in the bucket. That way it'll stay fresh. That's what I do. I freeze 3 buckets at a time, and then I leave them in the garage, and then I put another 3 buckets in there. That way I can do about 40 or 50 gallons at a time. Otherwise, I'd be out here boiling every day. And if you're doing a backyard maple production, you really don't want it to eat up too much of your time. So before we start talking about evaporating this, make sure you hit the subscription button down below. Press that little bell also, so you get notifications every time I make a new video. All right, so now that you've got all this sap collected, a couple things. In order to turn into syrup, you have to boil away the water. When you collect the sap, it's anywhere from 2 to 4% sugar content. You want to get that to be more like 60% sugar content. So you really need to evaporate a bunch of the water. How can you do that? If you're doing just a little bit of sap and you're doing a basic method, I find a turkey fryer actually works really well. It's going to cost propane though, so it kind of costs a little bit of money. You can also build a homemade rig. I have this one from the previous video that I made out of an old filing cabinet and some buffet trays like you would see at a buffet restaurant. And you just kind of keep boiling, and as it gets more and more boiled, you progressively move it from one pan to the other. You start with fresh sap that's like, air temperature, and as it gets warmer, you move it backwards. I had 3 pans in this one, and then the final pan was the darkest, most finished sap. You can do that as well. This new setup that I have here actually has a 2 foot by 4 foot divided pan, and it has another pan above it that slowly feeds raw sap into it. You're basically going to boil it for a long time. Why? What did he do now? 40 gallons of sap will get you 1 gallon of syrup, roughly. It will vary depending on how much sugar content you have, but that's the basic gist of it. So it takes a lot of sap just to make 1 gallon of syrup. So once you have it in this outside rig here, how do you know it's syrup? Basically, maple syrup boils at a different temperature than water. Water boils at about 210 degrees where I am, which is in Northeast Ohio. If you're closer to sea level, it might boil at 212. If you're higher up in the mountains, it might boil, even lower, like 209, 208. Maple syrup boils at 7 degrees higher than the boiling point, wherever you are, of water. So if I'm at 210, when my syrup gets up to be about 215, 216, then I know it's getting really, really close to being maple syrup. I don't like to turn my syrup, finish my syrup on the rig outside. Instead, what I prefer to do is once it gets to that 214, maybe even 215 range, I drain it all off into a pot, I bring it inside, and I finish it there. I evaporate it to that 217 degree inside the house. Why don't you want to do the whole process in the house? it produces a ton of steam. You can tell from these videos of my evaporator. This will peel the paint and the wallpaper off any room in your house. It also probably would make all the walls pretty sticky, so not a great idea. You want to do this outdoors. Now, once you get this finished, a couple things you can do. You can filter it. You can run it through coffee filters if you want while it's hot. Is preferable. It'll get any sort of impurities out of it. There's something that's called niter that kind of shows up in maple syrup. It's harmless, but it's kind of like a white powder. And if you filter it good enough, that'll be gone. You can also buy filters online. Here's one that I have that I use sometimes, and I also have a paper pre-filter that I can run it through. However you do it, some people just run it through like an old piece of cloth. I've even seen people like wash t-shirts on high heat without any detergent and just run it through old like white t-shirts. I mean, if that's what you want to do, then go for it. But once it gets to that temperature, then you're ready to jar it up. I use regular old mason jars, just the jelly jar size. You want to clean them, wash them, and get them really hot first. I tend to open up my dishwasher and run just the jelly jars in there on the really hot cycle of my dishwasher to clean them out and to get them heated up before I put the hot syrup in there. You do want to put the syrup in the jars hot, not cold. It won't work cold. The reason you want everything hot is because if you put the hot syrup into a cold jar, it might shatter. Glass, you know, when they change the temperature will shatter. And I've had that happen with other things in the past. So you take the jar, fill it with syrup, just use a ladle. If you have a funnel, that works too. You want to leave maybe about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch on top of the jar, a little bit of, it's called headspace, a little bit of air to breathe. Put your cap on, your lid from your canning jar, okay, and seal it down. This doesn't need a water bath or anything. Instead, what I do, once it's sealed tight, I flip it over for a minute or so and then flip it back. The syrup itself will just help it seal, okay? And as the syrup cools, you're waiting to hear that wonderful noise that everyone loves, that click noise from the jar going in. Oh, the most beautiful sound there is out there. Once it cools completely down to room temperature, you're done. Write the year on top, go store it in the basement. I have had jars of syrup in my basement for over 2 years, and they haven't gone bad. They've been perfect when I crack it open. Once you crack it open though, you do need to put it in the refrigerator. I like to have like a little squeeze bottle filled with syrup, and I just wash it and fill it whenever I run out. And that's it. The really simple way to make maple syrup. So simple, yeah, it'll take you several days and quite a bit of time. But it's well worth it. You can give it to friends, you can give it to neighbors. Everyone's always impressed when you make your own maple syrup. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure you follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Dave's Ohio Barbecue. Also, make sure you subscribe. Hit the subscription button, then hit the little bell next to it. That way I get notifications. That way you get notifications anytime I make a new video. And also, make sure that you check back soon. Tell a friend, leave a comment, whatever you want. I have a lot of videos coming out really soon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.